Good morning. Just a little disclaimer before we get started. Last time I spoke, there was a lot of background noise from my cat running around like crazy. So hopefully she will not today. But if you hear that, everything's fine. So the theme for today is to act with courage. As we explore Exodus 1:8 through 2:10, we'll be looking at the characters who act with courage, as well as discussing courage in general. So our scripture today is long, and we'll read through it. I will try to make it as interesting as possible. And then we're going to break it down again, focusing on the characters. So for the scripture, I'm using a Message version. If you guys want to pull it up, it'll be a little different. Again, we're starting from Exodus 1, verse 8, going through 2, verse 10. A new king came to power in Egypt who didn't know Joseph. He spoke to his people in alarm. There are way too many of these Israelites for us to handle. We've got to do something. Let's devise a plan to contain them, lest if there's a war, they should join our enemies or just walk off and leave us. So they organized them into work gangs and put them to hard labor under gang foremen. They built the storage cities, Pithom and Ramses, for Pharaoh. But the harder the Egyptians worked them, the more children the Israelites had. Children everywhere. The Egyptians got so they couldn't stand the Israelites and treated them worse than ever, crushing them with slave labor. They made them miserable with hard labor, making bricks and mortar and back-breaking work in the fields. They piled on the work, putting them under this cruel workload. The king of Egypt had a talk with 2 Hebrew midwives. One was named Sifra and the other Puah. He said, "When you deliver from the Hebrew women, look at the sex of the baby. If it's a boy, kill him. If it's a girl, let her live." But the midwives had far too much respect for God and didn't do what the king of Egypt ordered. They let the boy babies live. The king of Egypt called in the midwives. "Why didn't you obey my orders? You let those babies live." The midwives answered Pharaoh, "The Hebrew women aren't like Egyptian women. They're vigorous. Before the midwife can get there, they've already had the baby." God was pleased with the midwives. The people continued to increase in number, a very strong people. And because the midwives honored God, God gave them families of their own. So Pharaoh issued a general order to all his people. Every boy that is born, drown him in the Nile, but let the girls live. A man from the family of Levi married a Levite woman. The woman became pregnant and had a son. She saw that there was something special about him and hid him. She hid him for 3 months. When she couldn't hide him any longer, she got a little basket boat made of papyrus, waterproofed it with tar and pitch, and placed the child in it. Then she set it afloat in the reeds at the edge of the Nile. The baby's older sister found herself a vantage point a little way off and watched to see what would happen to him. Pharaoh's daughter came to the Nile to bathe. Her maidens strolled on the bank. She saw the basket boat floating in the reeds and sent her maids to get it. She opened it and saw the child, a baby, crying. Her heart went out to him. She said, "This must be one of the Hebrew babies." Then his sister was before her. "Do you want me to go and get a nursing mother from the Hebrews so she can nurse the baby for you?" Pharaoh's daughter said, "Yes, go." The girl went and called the child's mother. Pharaoh's daughter told her, "Take this baby and nurse him for me. I'll pay you." The woman took the child and nursed him. After the child was weaned, she presented him to Pharaoh's daughter, who adopted him as her son. She named him Moses, which means pulled out, saying, "I pulled him out of the river." In our minds, we each have a definition of courage. Let's see if it matches Merriam-Webster. They say courage is mental or moral strength to venture, preserve, and withstand danger, fear, or difficulty. So, keeping that in mind, let's go back and look at the characters. So, the first one, immediately it talks about having a new king and that the new king doesn't know Joseph. So, the last couple of weeks, we've looked at Joseph quite a bit. And if we're looking for acts of courage where his morality has persevered over circumstances, he was sold as a slave. So in that situation, he would have had to have courage. And then we've got the situation with him and Potiphar's wife. He went to jail, was forgotten about, and then ended up being put in a position of power. So as far as circumstances to overcome, he's got quite a few. And along the way, we see that he never lost his moral compass. He never lost sight of his God or who he was because of his God. He was the same Joseph, whether he was a slave or in charge of what the Pharaoh put him over. So then what about this new king that came to power? My immediate reaction is just no, because him ordering the murder of babies, to me, that's cowardice and not courage. But I would like to say that any position of authority comes with courage. It takes courage to be in charge of other people. It takes courage to lead. So while I don't think that this actual character was courageous, I think the act of being king or pharaoh is courageous, personally. So then going on to the next character we come to, because there's a lot of background characters. There's the general Israelites, the general Egyptians, but it's hard to tell without knowing more details, which ones are specifically courageous. So we come to the midwives, Shiphrah and Puah. And when doing some research on this, I thought it was interesting because it says the two Hebrew midwives, which immediately make me think that they're Hebrew. But according to some interpretations, it just means that they served as midwives for the Hebrew. So we don't know if they were Hebrew or not. But we do know their names. So they were told, as soon as they find out if the baby is a boy or girl when they're delivered, to kill them. And regardless of their culture, whether Hebrew, Egyptian, or some other culture, they know about God. So they have that moral compass. They know that murder is wrong, and they know that the king is wrong. So they defy him, and they don't kill any of the babies, which, I mean, he's a king, so talk about the things that could happen to them. They're taking a big chance here. And of course, he finds out about it and comes back at them. And they said the Hebrew women aren't like the Egyptian women. They're vigorous. So rather than defending their position because they don't feel like it's safe to do that, they're using some wit. And they're basically saying that they can't help it. The Hebrew women just have the baby so fast that they can't get there in time. And so they're not punished for it. But instead, the Pharaoh now goes to all the people, puts the proclamation on them. So now the individual Israelites have to be courageous if they want their sons to live. Or they follow the law and do something I couldn't even imagine. So that's when we meet Moses's mother. My version didn't have the names. So when looking those up, his mom was Jochebed and his dad was Amram. This passage doesn't really say anything about his dad, but I think that I don't think his mom would be able to be courageous without the support of Moses's dad. So she broke the law. She risked her life to save Moses. She keeps him at home for 3 months. makes a basket, and puts him in the Nile. Because of the times that we're talking about, if Abraham, Moses' father, had opposed her, I don't know that she would have been successful. So I think there's an unsung hero here. I think that it was their combined courage that helped give Moses life. And then we have Moses' older sister, Miriam. She's obviously following her father's footsteps. She watches over Moses. And then when Pharaoh's daughter finds him, she goes right up and talks to her, which, knowing that animosity between the Hebrews and the Israelites takes a lot of courage. And she goes even farther and gets her mom back involved so that she gets to nurse Moses for 3 years, which I think is just beautiful. That leads us into Pharaoh's daughter. So she took on Moses' son, knowing that it was illegal, knowing that her father would despise him if he ever found out. And I think it would be interesting to know that conversation when he did find out, because we know that Moses knew his identity when he got older. But that took a lot of courage to defy her father, the lawmaker, to raise a son that is not her own. Just beautiful. And then lastly, you have the daughters' maidens. So they would have been bound to Pharaoh because he's their king, but instead they obey the mistress over their king. And they would have been risking punishment just like everybody else for defying the orders. So in this story, we have at least 8 acts of courage from 8 people, at least, to save Moses, who then becomes a leader to the Israelites, a prophet recognized in Christianity, Judaism, Islam, and several other Arabic religions. Thinking about how these 8 singular acts passed over the time that it happened, down through thousands of years till now, reminded me of the ripple effect. I'm sure most of you are aware of it, but you know, when you stand and you throw a rock in a pond and you watch the ripples come out, it's not just one ripple, but dozens of ripples. And they keep going and going and going, just like these acts of courage did, just like our acts of courage do. So I think it's easier, at least it's easier for me to read a story like this and to pull out the little acts of courage, to classify them, to think about them. But I feel like it's a lot harder to look at ourselves and look at the people around us and say, I'm courageous. What I did was courageous, is courageous. What that person did is courageous. And I think that we need to do that. I don't think that thinking of ourselves as courageous, at least for me, it's not something that's normally in my vocabulary, you know? Like people talk about being nice and they talk about being honest, but for courageous, I immediately go straight to heroes, you know, like people who've served in a war, people who saved somebody's life. Heroes are courageous, but me, I'm just a teacher. So I haven't really saved anybody's life. So how could I be courageous? And I went through and I just made like a short list because I don't want to ask anyone to do anything that I'm not willing to do, which means that I'm going to ask you to do something. So I think of courageous as oftentimes being obedient when you step out in something that's scary, but that you have to do to stay true to your moral compass, or in our case, God. So leaving Graceland and my career path to be a singer to instead become a teacher, leaving Alliance Data Systems and my nice corporate job to pursue a teaching career, to get my master's degree years after I thought I was done with school. to take a chance living with a roommate after many bad experiences and swearing I would never do it again, to leave the congregation of my youth to come here and be at Grove City. So small acts of courage. As for my life, my thought immediately went to my parents. My dad put himself through college, moved out to Ohio without his wife and children to get a job to support us, moved in with members of the church that he had never met before. My mom, with a hearing loss, chose to have children, knowing she wouldn't be able to hear them. Yeah. And those are just two people, well, three people, including me. And look at all of those acts of courage. So, what I would like for us to take just a little bit of time to think about, maybe 1 minute, is to look at yourself and your life and come up with just one act of courage and use that as you go through this week to continue reflecting on yourself and the people around you with your lens on courage. So I'm going to just set a 1 minute timer, and I'm going to close my eyes because I get really distracted when I see things. So just take 1 minute looking for an act of courage in your own life or the lives of those around you. All right. The thing that came to my mind almost immediately was love, and how it takes courage to love, especially those that are different from ourselves. So that is all I have, and thank you.